Joining us now, NBC News correspondent Dasha Burns, The Hill senior political correspondent Amy Parnes, and Politico White House reporter and co-author of Politico's West Wing Playbook, Eli Stokols. Eli, I'm going to begin with you because we have seen this playbook now a lot since 2015.
Yeah, Katie, I mean, for as unprecedented as this whole situation is with a former president, going through a criminal trial and still the possibility of conviction hanging out there, Donald Trump has responded to situations like this over and over and over again throughout the last several years in his entire life, really, in the same way. He has always tried to inoculate himself against inconvenient outcomes, harsh judgments, by telling people that the system is rigged, that the election will be rigged unless he wins, that Congress is engaged in witch hunts, that the media is biased unless he happens to like the story. I mean, it's always this sort of self-serving narrative. We've seen it over and over again, those of us who have covered him. And I think we've seen it throughout the trial. We've seen it when he stands there before reporters and has railed about this trial. And certainly, a lot depends on the outcome, what the jury determines, what the judge's possible sentencing is. But I think it's safe to say that Donald Trump will be railing against the process, even if he's acquitted. And certainly, I think the more unknown situation is what happens if he's actually found guilty of this. And that obviously has to do with the judge. But that would be really uncharted waters for Donald Trump even, but certainly for the country.
And for voters. And there's a lot of polling that suggests that voters will take it seriously, Dasha. If he is convicted of a crime, they won't want to vote for him. Does the Trump campaign see those polls? Do they worry about those polls? Are they doing anything regarding that?
Well, we already saw a fundraising email come through today where the Trump team is asking for 1 million responses by midnight to the question, would you vote for me if I were arrested? So they know that this is something that can potentially move the needle if there is a conviction here. Look, the number one thing they're preparing for is messaging and then when and how to message that, because the challenge for them has been that he's in the courtroom. So regardless of what the outcome here is, now they want to barnstorm those battleground states and message to the point that Eli was making.
I wonder if it's been a challenge exactly for them, though, Amy, because Donald Trump being on the campaign trail, I mean, certainly a lot of news organizations would not be covering his rallies day in and day out. Fox News doesn't even cover his rallies day in and day out. But the courtroom and the trial, that gets covered day in and day out. So has it been a negative for Donald Trump, or has it been a positive seeing him inside this courtroom and getting the attention that he's getting?
Well, I think he likes it. He loves the attention on himself. He's made it a point to go to the cameras before and after, and he's done that daily. And then he's also capitalized on where he is. He did this rally in New York City this past week. He's not campaigning as much as he would like. Obviously, he can't be in the swing states, but he loves these moments for, as Eli said, for kind of proving that that everyone is against him and that he's going to win anyway. And look at the history. Look what they've done to me with 2 impeachments, with the Mueller investigation. I've always come out okay. I've been innocent. And here is another example. And so he's going to continue to use this. I think they see this as working to his benefit in a way.
There's polling that shows that he's winning in a lot of battleground states, and President Biden is losing in some key places. At the same time, President Biden is raking in a lot more fundraising dollars. Donald Trump is taking in a lot of money, but it's not as much, and it's not coming from small donors, which is what he relied on heavily in 2016. Is the small donor deficit an indicator? Should we read into that?
Potentially. I mean, I will tell you that his team is not taking anything for granted. They're seeing the same numbers that we are. But this is why they do want to get him out into the battleground states. They know that there's a TV performance right outside of the court, but they know that you have to be on the ground and you have to be organized in these places.
All right, let's talk about the Biden team. Amy, you've done a lot of coverage of them. They are planning to aggressively capitalize, apparently, on Donald Trump's courthouse appearances. Whether or not he's convicted or acquitted, what does that look like? What does that mean?
Well, it fits into the president's whole message on democracy. And they're going to continue to, they've been very smart about getting out of the way of the trial and not speaking so much about it. You've seen the president only address it a couple of times, once at the White House Correspondents' Dinner in jest. But I think he's going to continue to talk more about democracy and how much of a threat Donald Trump is to democracy. That's something that played well for him in 2020. That's something that the campaign it's a main pillar of their argument going in. But I think a lot of Democrats at the same time say, okay, it has to be democracy and the economy and immigration and all of the stuff that's happening, the war in Gaza. They'd like to see more of this happen. So you're gonna see the president sort of insert all of these things into the broader argument of democracy as well.
What happens, though, Eli, if he's acquitted? How does the Biden team message on an acquittal?
I think they still are going to be fine with the contrast of saying, the trial's over, let's turn to the campaign, and I am not the candidate who was just on trial for several weeks for paying hush money to a porn star, allegedly. I think they are fine with the contrast, and they are actually eager for Donald Trump to be out there more. They want this contrast. That's why they wanted to move up the debates and have the first debate next month, because they want people to start to see this election as a choice between the two of them. They do not want this to be a referendum on President Biden's term in office, even though they're both very proud of a lot of his accomplishments. They know this has to be a choice election, so they want those contrasts out there. They want to sharpen them. They want the two of them campaigning side by side. And if President Trump is acquitted here, look, it's not the end of his legal problems. They can still sort of prosecute that broader case against him as a threat to democracy, someone who plays by his own rules, who is kind of indifferent to the laws and the institutions that are fundamental to our democracy. They will be fine either way, I think. And I think there's concerns for the Biden folks, too, if he's convicted, because certainly, the possibility of violence after that. I mean, that just sort of takes this off into a whole different place, this election. And so I think that they are preparing for both outcomes, but eager for the trial to be over and sort of for the general election matchup to crystallize for more voters. I think they're hoping that will start to potentially move the polls a little bit in their direction.
As you said, a guilty verdict, uncharted territory. Amy, I want to ask you about something that Ezra Klein wrote about the other day, and this has been kind of nagging me as well as I look at this campaign and I try to think back to 2016. And one of the things that Hillary Clinton missed was she assumed, and her team assumed, that everybody would think Donald Trump was as much of a buffoon as they did. And that was not true, at least in the Electoral College. There were enough people that thought Donald Trump was viable, and they wanted to elect him, and they did. Here's what Ezra says. The mistake Democrats keep making about Trump again and again is to assume that the rest of the country will see Trump as they see Trump. But Trump won in 2016, and he came scarily close in 2020. Absent the pandemic, he might well have been reelected. Is there a feeling that obviously everyone's going to see Donald Trump as a threat to democracy? Obviously, they'll be reminded that Donald Trump was a chaotic president, and obviously they'll be as turned off by it as we, the Democrats, are?
I think there's this sense, Katie, that everyone knows this and everyone knows who Donald Trump is. And I think that's what Ezra is getting at, that everything that we know about him is already baked in. So now, this is why I was saying earlier that I'm hearing from a lot of people that the Democrats want to hear more about what else. Elections are about the future. Also, I don't think a lot of people, the president has done so much in terms of the economy, but, prove it, talk to people in simple language about what he has done. There has been poll after poll that suggests that the population, even Democrats, still don't understand what has been accomplished. So I think he has his work cut out for him in the coming months and 5 months to kind of explain and boil down and say, this is what we've done and this is where we're going. And if he doesn't do that, I think that it's bad news for the Democrats.
Amy Parnes, Eli Stokols, Dasha Burns, guys, thank you very much.